the fourth final assumption behind the assertion that science leads to atheism, which is based on philosophical naturalism and methodological naturalism. Let's discuss this assumption. So, people who believe that science leads to atheism, they really hold a non-scientific assumption. What is that non-scientific assumption? It's the philosophical worldview of philosophical naturalism. It's not scientific. What's philosophical naturalism? Philosophical naturalism is based on three things. Number one, the belief that there is no divine, the assertion that there's no divine. Number two, the assertion that all physical phenomena can be explained, all phenomena can be explained by physical processes. And number three, there is no afterlife, which is similar to the idea of that there's no divine. So what's philosophical naturalism? There's no divine, no hereafter, and all phenomena in the universe can be explained by physical processes. Now what's the problem with that? If these are the lenses that you put on your eyes to see the world, then what are you going to see? You're just going to see the denial of the divine, because these are your lenses, right? Say you go to an optometrist and you buy some glasses, Calvin Klein, the atheist edition, you put it on your face. What are you going to see? You ain't going to see God nowhere. You don't see no divine power, right? That's it. And that's why you have the likes of many scientists that, we all respect for their scientific endeavors, but frankly, they had the wrong lenses on. And they had non-scientific assumptions on their faces as lenses, which was Calvin Klein Atheist Edition, right? And so if you adopt that false philosophical assumption that basically is literally based on blind faith, in my view, then all you're going to see is the denial of the divine, because you started with that premise. You've put those lenses on. And even the atheist himself, Professor Michael Rules, a very honest atheist philosopher, he says, if you want a concession, I've always said that naturalism, philosophical naturalism, is an act of faith. Faith. And that's why when you discuss with people, don't discuss the science, discuss the assumptions that people are holding, and you have a more fruitful discussion. The next part of this assumption is methodological naturalism. Now, this is not a problem for theists, especially the Islamic tradition. Now, what's methodological naturalism? It's basically the assertion that for any scientific conclusion or theory to be scientific, it cannot refer to the divine power or creativity. That's all it's saying. It doesn't say God doesn't exist. It just says, for your science to be science, for your conclusion to be scientific, for your theory to be scientific, just don't refer to God's power or divine wisdom or creativity. Now, this is not a problem for the Muslim, because the Muslim believes that the whole universe is made up of physical causes. And these are asbab in Arabic. These are causes that God has used to manifest His divine will. That's not a problem for the Muslim. But what some people do is they conflate methodological naturalism and they think it means philosophical naturalism. No, because you could be a methodological naturalist, like when you do science you don't refer to God's divine power or creativity, but you could still be a theist that believes in God. Of course you can, there's no contradiction, because your philosophy could be, well, those physical causes are a manifestation of the divine will. No problem. So they conflate methodological naturalism with philosophical naturalism. And that's why evolutionary biologist Scott C. Todd, he said, of course the scientist as an individual is free to embrace a reality that transcends naturalism, methodological naturalism in this case.
Philosophical naturalism, as I mentioned previously, as a scientist, when you walk into this room and you wear the scientific coat, you are assuming you are only going to be looking at physical effects and physical causes, and you're assuming there is no non-physical entity that we're dealing with. There is no soul, there is no independent mind, there is nothing like this. Even from a scientific point of view, when you are looking at the world, you cannot say this is morally right, this is morally wrong. The person had this intention. No. From a scientific point of view, you're assuming everything is physical. That's known as methodological naturalism, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because Hassan ibn Haytham, he adopted methodological naturalism. He actually said we cannot go beyond our experiences when using science. But he was not somebody who believed in philosophical naturalism. He didn't believe nature was all there was. But as an assumption, he assumed we're only going to be looking at physical effects and physical causes. Philosophical naturalism is the belief there is nothing but matter. Right? That belief is different to methodological naturalism. And inshallah we can cover this more in the Q&A, because this is one of those things that there's loads of questions about, and sometimes even this concept is a bit hard to put your head around. But there's a difference between the two. Philosophical naturalism assumes the non-scientific assumption, this is very important, of philosophical naturalism, the view that there is no supernatural and everything can be explained by physical processes. But as pointed out by philosophers of science like Michael Roos, if you want a concession, I've always said naturalism is an act of faith. What he means here is philosophical naturalism, right? There's two different things here. Just because science works, you can't say philosophical naturalism is true. Methodological naturalism, as I explained, is you basically say everything we look at, we're going to look at natural effects, natural causes. Methodological naturalism has nothing to do with atheism. There's actually a lot of literature written on this. This is what the evolutionary biologist Scott Todd, how he summarizes it. The first part of this quotation is missing, so apologies for that. What he basically says is, even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is rejected from science because it's not naturalistic. So he says, no matter what the data says, we cannot say there's a God. That's methodological naturalism. Then he goes on to say, of course the scientist as an individual is free to embrace a reality that transcends naturalism. Right? Okay, also, science tells us the how, not the why. Knowing the how doesn't negate the why. So for example, even in the Quran we have this example in front of us. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Mulk, in chapter 67, it mentions, do you not see the birds in the sky with their wings going up and down? None holds them up except God. So you have this explanation. Look at the bird. It's up there in the sky, and it's up there, and it's flapping its wings. None holds it up except God. So you're getting two types of explanation here. You're getting a physical explanation. Lift, drag, Bernoulli's theorem, you calculate how it can fly. You got that physical causation there. The Quran is mentioning the wings. But then the Quran says, none holds it up except God. So the how and the why are two different things. Explaining how something works doesn't explain why it's there in the first place. Who created it? I can have a really good functioning car, and somebody can come along like Sufyan and explain to me how the car works really, really well, because he's a mechanical engineer, mashallah. Physicist. So he can put in, okay, you put in petrol, you have combustion, this is the way the engine works, this is the way the axials work, this is the way the gears work, this is the way the car actually functions, here's how the electronics work. Imagine if he spent 60 hours explaining to me how the car works, how. And then he said to me, therefore no one designed the car. Would that make sense?
No.
No, the how doesn't negate the why. Right? So these are two different things.